Hello, hi. So my name is Trivino. I'm a partner here at EY. I have an engineering background, master's in computer sciences. I have focused, however, in the last 18 years of my career on forensic technology. I am what you would call an IT expert witness. I'm the person who comes in when everything goes horribly, horribly wrong. And today I will give you a little bit of a background from that perspective, what to do when everything goes horribly, horribly wrong, or how you can avoid that at least. So that is a little bit of a background from my side. Before we start, as I had the opportunity today to speak to a very technical audience, I could not restrain myself from the geekiness, and you will see there is some elements into it, amongst which the code on the background here. And one of those elements was actually the discussions that some of the programmers have. They tend to make it a very, very strong discussion. Some of them are iconic, have been going on since the 60s. One of those discussions was, for instance, which text editor to use. And I thought some of these discussions have actually turned into such religious beliefs, I felt that I have to disclose my beliefs before we start, so you can decide whether you want to listen or just take a nap. And that's that. So this is my religious belief. I believe spaces are the way to indent your code. You don't use tabs at all. Very strong one. Now with that out of the way, let's dive in. The death of coding. I think we've talked about artificial intelligence today a few more times. Let me do it once again. And I want to start with this statement that Jensen Huang just said a few weeks ago in the World Summit in Dubai. He stated that coding is no longer a relevant skill for the future generation. Now, for the ones earlier today, I believe SAP was looking for a couple of people. I think you need to hire them now, because there will not be any anymore if it was up to Jensen Huang. He said with the advent of artificial intelligence, coding will eventually become less relevant. He did say eventually. Let's have a look at something one of my colleagues did just a few weeks ago. So my colleague needed to have 2 Panda data frames. He wanted to remove some rows from one Panda data frame with the rows in another one. And modern guy, or maybe just lazy as he is, he asked ChatGPT. And this is what ChatGPT answered. Now, I don't know how fast you are. This doesn't actually solve the problem. The rows are still there. So he points that out to ChatGPT, like your code just does not work. And ChatGPT does give him the correct answer right after, and even apologizes, which is very polite of it. So, you're welcome. ChatGPT has given the answer, eventually. But mind you, there is a disclaimer down there that says ChatGPT can make mistakes. Sam Altman, in his Twitter feed, basically said, ChatGPT is incredibly limited. A lot of the AI technology today still has many limitations. A lot more research is necessary to actually iron them out still. But we can all agree that with the incredible speed that we see AI technologies are evolving, this may soon be all gone. So how does that affect us in business? Let me quickly get my notes, make sure that I don't miss anything. I have a lot of them. Well, we see for a lot of companies actually right now that we cannot ignore what we do with artificial intelligence. For a lot of companies we see today, artificial intelligence has become something that has a huge influence in their competitiveness, in their strategic development going forward. On the other hand, they need to balance what they make their decisions or the investments into. We have seen companies made huge investments in artificial intelligence that ultimately led to no results because they were not applicable in a real-life situation. On the other hand, not doing anything at all may put you in a situation that you will end up losing altogether, that you will end up losing your strategic positions. Let's look at also the influence that artificial intelligence has on corporations that are not tech companies. I had a conversation a few weeks ago with one of my former colleagues who now works for a global German retailer. And we were discussing a little bit about the latest recruitment efforts, and he pointed out that we're talking German retailer, they almost have 1,000 people now in IT. 1,000 people in IT. This is a retailer. I expected this from procurement. I expected this in finance. I didn't expect them in IT. We have now other businesses that are almost as close to becoming a tech company that aren't really a tech company. But it is not the first time that the CIO or that we as a business are confronted with a changing digital landscape that impacts our business so heavily. Let's take you onto a journey of the last 40 years. Here we are. Hope you can read it, but let me go through it. The term CIO was actually invented early 80s with the advent of the personal computer revolution, right? For some of you that were around then, this is the moment when local area networks were installed, when ERP systems, such as SAP, I believe, was founded then, was actually starting up. It became clear that we needed executive leadership to make use out of the promises of IT in our businesses. We then go into the 90s. The internet is coming up at that stage. We have a lot more complexity, a lot more scale on the IT side, so the role of the CIO, of course, expands with that. It's beginning 2000 that things get a little bit shaky. With the dot-com boom, there is a lot of pressure on cost cutting, a lot of pressure for the CIO to showcase return on investment. That was exacerbated a few years later with the financial crisis. And as if the 2000s weren't difficult enough, you also had the downfall of the Enron scandal, with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which moved the role of the CIO into risk and compliance. Beginning of 2010, this is when the mobile revolution came around. This is where tablets and mobile phones changed the way we interacted with our consumers and with our employees. This is also the era where big data comes to stage and the cybersecurity threats become far more complex and sophisticated. The role of the CIO is now expanded into data management and governance, but also protecting the corporate assets from cyber threats. And then the 2020s. We all remember that as if it was yesterday, because it was. COVID-19. We are all back in our home offices. This is where remote working and digital collaboration became into play, right? And this is when it became clear that the CIO had a role to play in business resilience. Today, we're on the precipice of yet another big change. We talked about it, artificial intelligence, machine learning, but also the Internet of Things and robotics. Today, the CIO has a role in innovation and changing the business models. Now, looking over the last 40 years, we see the role of technical executives, or CIO, move from technical operational support to strategic advisors. And that particular role will continue to grow in importance over the next few years. A role, indeed, with great power. We've talked about it too. All right. With the advent of AI, we are seeing also certain concerns around it. Concerns about how do our algorithms impact us as human beings? How are our codes and our algorithms actually ethical ones? And we see regulations and frameworks pop up, the EU AI Act being one of them, but also the NIST risk management framework for AI are two perfect examples for that. Now, these are frameworks that are intended for artificial intelligence, but do they also have a role to play for programmers, for people that are coding? Well, let's explore it a little bit. Before we move into it, let me first make a distinction between artificial intelligence and traditional programming. And I'm sure you already know all of it, but I still want to, humor me. And no, it is not a sequence of 10,000 if-then-else statements. AI tends to be a little bit more than that. Artificial intelligence and coding or programming are actually related fields. They're very much intertwined with each other. There is a big difference, though. Artificial intelligence tend to employ different techniques, say from coding algorithms. For instance, heuristics, natural language programming, or neural networks. That being said, though, artificial intelligence is typically designed and implemented using code. And we as coders now, today, are going to use artificial intelligence to code again. So we can say that both programming and artificial intelligence are actually symbiotic fields, very much intertwined, and will continue to become more close to each other in the next few years. This is a framework, this is an EY framework, but you have others out there that put a little bit of a context around ethical coding and responsible AI. And I want to draw some parallels and maybe also explore some of the differences between responsible AI and our general coding practices today. If we look at the right side, we could argue that those elements are actually quite similar to the coding practices that we see today. Both fields, both artificial intelligence as well as coding, tend to put the user at the center of our focus point. User centricity, user experience are important in both of them. When we talk about transparency, cybersecurity, we can all argue it's a fundamental element of programming. Cybersecurity is that to the extent that is actually an influence to the artificial intelligence community. Where it gets a little bit more artificial intelligence focused is on the left side of it. However, this is where I would want to argue that it's still relevant for coding practices. Let's first look at accountability, the ability to justify, to explain what your code does, to look into any unintended consequences it may give. Something that is very relevant in artificial intelligence. But I want to give you an example, recent example, of where one could argue this is also relevant in coding practices. Do any of you remember the exit utils backdoor? Just happened a few weeks ago. Let me explain that. Actually, a German software engineer named Andres Freud was running his piece of code and noticed that there was some latency in its performance. So he did a big check, and he noticed that in the exit utils package, which is a compression package in Unix, or Linux systems more specifically, that compression package actually contained a backdoor. Now imagine if that was rolled out. Pretty much every computer system in the world would be infected by that backdoor. It got a CVE score of 10, which is the highest score you can get. If it was not for this very diligent German software engineer, we would all have a major problem today. Okay, it's been patched. But I want to draw your attention towards that gag on the left side, with a very complex modern digital infrastructure and a small piece of code that was developed by an open source developer somewhere in Nebraska who was doing this voluntarily in his free time. Because that is exactly what that exit utils was all about. Can you justify your code base? Can you explain where that issue is going to? And if it would come to a court of law, are you liable for it? Accountability in coding practices. Where it gets even more interesting is on the top side of it. fairness and bias. Fairness and bias are two topics that actually I haven't heard before the AI hype that came out today, right? Was it not for Amazon's slightly biased recruitment mechanisms, I didn't necessarily hear about this in coding algorithms. However, again, I want to give an example here. And I talked to a lovely lady earlier today, so I hope she doesn't hate me for this example. And it's about my car. I have, as it should, a proper German car. And my car is equipped with speech recognition software. Now, when I give my car an instruction, let's say I need to drive to this address in Brussels, it refuses to listen to me. It sends me to Rotterdam, it sends me to Frankfurt. It does not send me to Brussels. However, if my husband gives that same command, it does it perfectly. And mind you, my husband has a very strong lisp. Not saying the computer system is biased, but I have my doubts. So fairness and bias, two principles that come into play today. Sorry, just looking at this again. Debiasing is actually one of the most difficult things to address, right? We just say that this currently is part of the EU AI Act. And for those of you who are technical executives in this room, you will soon be confronted with that. There will be lawsuits in relation to that. You will have to show that your algorithms, whether they are AI or otherwise, are unbiased. Debiasing is so difficult. And just to give you an example on that, looking at biases and the way to eradicate that in history, right? It has taken decades, if not centuries, to address bias problems or social systemic problems. If we look at them, most of them are not even eradicated today. Think about racial discrimination for once. Now, technology can be a big influencer in changing that. Any of you has kids? More better yet, any of you have teenagers with a mobile phone? If you have teenagers with a mobile phone, you know how much technology is able to change the behavior, and fast. So I would argue that you all have the opportunity today to change the human society, in fact, for the better. Not because the regulations make you, but because you have the power to change that. So in conclusion, over the many, many years that the CIO role has changed from a more technical support, operational support, to really a strategic advisor in corporations and persons that can actually drive change not only in your businesses, but into society yourself. I would want to encourage you to take on those ethical frameworks and implement that today, because you hold the power to decide whether the future will contain tabs or spaces.